So what we're going to be talking about today are, we're going to give you a quick overview of the RSB greenhouse gas approach. We're just going to quickly tell you why we've developed this new tool, give you a very, very brief overview of what those terms of use are, and then Nicola will take you through a tool demo. So I'm going to hand over to Nicola now, and she will kick things off. Thank you, Nicola.
Hi, everybody. Can you hear me? Can you hear me, Hannah?
Yes, we can hear you perfectly. Thanks, Nicola.
Super. Okay. So good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us on this webinar, which for us is really exciting. You know, we've been working really hard to get this new greenhouse gas tool up and running and developed and super user friendly, so that everybody finds it easy to use and also finds it a really intuitive and informative tool. So I hope in today's webinar we'll be able to explain really well its functionality. And of course, as Hannah said, you know, any sort of queries or technical glitches, please do get in touch with us. Okay, next slide, please, Hannah. So I'm not going to go really into the methodologies that we use for assessing greenhouse gas emissions at RSB, because of course all of the participants on this webinar are familiar with our methodologies. So we're going to really take more of a technical, functional overview of the tool. But just to mention a couple of important tips. So of course, when we're looking at the greenhouse gas emissions within the tool, we look at the entire scope. So we look at feedstock production, transport and processing. And you'll see that those really are the main calculation and data entry points within the tool. And we also, at the end, within our results sheet, we provide you with a space to see your greenhouse gas emission reduction as a percentage, as well as your overall greenhouse gas result. Okay, next slide, Hannah. So, of course, you're all aware about the various factors that can impact upon your greenhouse gas emissions. There are several factors along the supply chain that can dramatically increase emissions. So things like land use change, inefficient or high use of fertilizer, a loss of soil carbon through various management practices. Of course, inefficient practices across the supply chain, whether it's in your transportation system, your processing system, so inefficient use of energy. And of course, there are factors that can decrease your greenhouse gas emissions. So, for example, minimum soil disturbance, having a low-till agricultural system, perennial feedstocks, of course, which create a longer-term store of carbon and have a reduced effect on soil disturbance, and then, of course, reducing your agricultural inputs and your overall energy consumption along the supply chain. Okay. Next slide, Emma. Thanks. Now, of course, as part of RSB certification, you have various options for calculating greenhouse gas emissions, and it may be that you are familiar with some of these other tools that are listed here as being acceptable within the RSB certification scheme. And of course, it's the RSB GHG tool that we're going to go through today. So I'm sure most, if not all of you, will have used the old tool that we had before, the online tool. And if you go to the next slide, Hannah. Our new tool is quite different from the old one, as you'll see. So the old one being online, it had a lot sort of based in the background. So in terms of emission factors, in terms of the ability to really manipulate emission factors and data and have a real view of what's going on. So we've tried to keep this, with it being based in Excel, we've tried to keep it a little bit more transparent, really, so you can see all of your emission factors as you select your inputs. You have the ability to manually change your emission factors, but also all of the calculation and the emission factor databases within it are locked and protected, which of course maintains the integrity of the tool. So you don't really have to worry about, for example, accidentally, you know, deleting a line from it, or accidentally changing an emission factor that you didn't want to, or deleting something else. You know, it does have that full protection. So it's super user friendly. It's also, being in Excel, it's much easier for us to manage, us to update, and us to provide technical help on. as well as our tool developers. So we've got some super tool developers, and Claire is on the line with us now in case we need any extra technical input. And they've done a fantastic job in making sure that it's really all-encompassing, and it can deal, as far as we've developed so far, it can deal with a very, very wide range of feedstocks and supply chain situations. And I should also say, I think Hannah mentioned this, but as the tool carries on being developed, each time we have a new version of it, we will be emailing you all a copy. So you'll always be kept up to date with the latest version. Okay. Just a very brief recap. So you will all have been sent the disclaimer, and you will have signed it, and that is the protocol for us to release the tool. And I should also say that each time a new user wishes to access the tool, so it could be a colleague of yours in the office, but as soon as that new user would like a copy of it, they would need to get in touch with us. We will email them out a copy of the disclaimer, and if they could fill that out, sign it, send it back to us, then we will release a copy of the tool to them. So please don't share the tool internally, externally, and so forth. And I'm not going to go through the terms, but this is just to remind you that there are fairly, comprehensive terms that we all need to stick to. Okay. Next slide, Hannah. Thank you. Yeah, I won't go through all of the requirements now, but yeah, just to remind you of them. Okay, next slide, Hannah. Right, so now I think we will start with the tool demo. So if you make me presenter, Hannah, then I'll share my screen. Can everybody see my screen?
I think we can.
Yes, it's good.
Fantastic. Okay, so let's get started. Well, look, I think you've all been sent a copy of the tool, so hopefully you will have had a couple of minutes to have a quick look at it. But if you haven't, I'm pleased to present it to you here. So as I said, it's an Excel-based tool, and we have this really nice user interface, this home screen, which is how you navigate your way through the tool. So I'm going to take you through each step within the tool, each step within the supply chain, to explain how it works and where you input your data and where you see your results. So here is your home page. You can see all these little buttons here that take you to each step along the supply chain. First page here, instructions. It's going to choose not to work for me now. There we go. Okay, so as you go through the tool, you'll see these little white boxes, and these white boxes indicate space for you to enter data. So if you see a white box, then it's quite possible that it's applicable for you to enter data. Now, if you're unsure about the data exactly that's being asked for, or whether it's applicable in your particular supply chain situation, do click on and hover over these little red triangles that you see here. Those contain guidance notes, and they're really, really important to make sure that you really understand what's being asked to capture at each step of the tool. And I'll let you work your own way through this introductory sheet. I'm not going to read it out to you, but suffice to say it does contain instructions. So if you're having any if you're unsure of what to fill in, or where different things are, please do go to this instructions page from your home page. And I should also say that on each of the tabs you'll see this home button here, and that's how you navigate back to the home page. Okay, now the next sheet is your user details. So if you could just input your own details each time you fill out the GHG tool. And then we'll begin with feedstock production. So these buttons here are where you enter your raw data. You've got feedstock production, so that's production of any type of feedstock, whether it's agricultural, forestry based, or whatever it is. Land use change, this is where we input data relating to positive or negative land use change, where that's taken place. Then we've got the first step of, oops, didn't need to click on that, the first step of transport. Then we have various processing steps and some more transport steps. And I should say that the tool has been developed in such a way that, of course, we understand the supply chains. It's not just simply a case of one size fits all. So often you'll have several transport and processing steps along the way. And so you can choose to include more or less transport and processing steps as they apply to you. And at the end, you'll have the opportunity in the results sheet to select those steps in order so that you get the right results for your calculation. So let's start with feedstock processing. So you can see in the sheet here, this is where we input data. If my screen is too small for you to be able to see, could somebody just speak up? And if I don't hear anything, I'll assume you can see it okay. This feedstock production sheet is where you input your data, all about the production of your biomass, the production of your feedstock. So we've got the name of the product, which is really important, because that you will find linked back to your results sheet, and it tells you the name of what you're working with, essentially. Your country of operation and your currency. And then we work through all of the crop information, the feedstock information, such as the crop type. Some of these boxes you'll see drop down lists. Don't forget to scroll through them, because they will often be longer than the list you see. You can input your yield, and please take notes of the units of measurement. So in the case of your feedstock yield, we're talking about wet mass per hectare. Sometimes the data need wet, sometimes the data need dry. So do take note of those units. And as I said, you've got your red triangular boxes, and as you hover over them, you'll get some pointers as to what's being asked for. I won't go through all the methodological elements, but suffice to say the tool copes with the different methodologies that we offer, so RSB Global and EU Red, and it's being developed for ICAO as well. And what that means is that there are one or two places where data might not be applicable for you. So for example, where we ask for price, your price of your feedstock, that's only relevant if you're carrying out an RSB Global calculation. So in that case, you wouldn't need to enter that for an EU Red calculation. Okay, and then further down, we've got space for you to enter data about your co-products and your residues. And where you are entering data about your lower heating values, so your megajoules of energy per kilo of dry mass, there's also a list with some data, some data from the EU Red about the given lower heating values. So feel free to use some of them if need be. Okay, then further down, we've got space to capture all of your fertilizer data. So here are your N values. And you enter, as I said, all of the white boxes are where you enter your data. You can also enter notes, and that's really helpful if you are filling out this form, which is then going to be passed on to an auditor to review as part of your certification process. Then please do add any notes that you think will support your calculation, particularly if you're adding something like, in the case here, we have this space for other fertilizers. Okay, and in this test case, we're looking at sugarcane. Okay, and in these boxes here, we've entered some fertilizer products which weren't in the fertilizers list. So we've got filter mud cake, we've got vinasse. We put in here the volumes, as you do for all of the other fertilizers and inputs. But you can see here, you add in your own emission factor. It says add in the emission factor in kilograms of CO2 equivalents per kilogram product. And those cells have helpfully come up automatically in red. And it means that you need to put in your emission factor there. So if we were to put a new product in here, okay, and we put in an amount, 100 kilograms, the corresponding box here comes up as red, and it's just to remind you to please put in your emission factor, okay? And then here you've got your notes, and that's where you can add information about where your emission factor has come from. Oh, sorry, actually you can put it in here as well. Emission factor source. You give information about where your emission factor has come from. So please do provide a reference, because that'll be really important for your auditor to understand. And we've got space here for your organic fertilizers, your plant protection products. Again, we have space here for plant protection products which are not part of these groups here. And so again, you can put in your emission factors in these red boxes. I should also say there are 3 boxes here because they each correspond to a different methodology: RSB Global, EU Red, and ICAO. So of course, if you're only interested in the EU Red certification, if that's the reason for you using this tool, then you can just put in your emission factor in EU Red and you don't have to worry about the others. Or if you wish, you can put it in all 3, that's fine. And all of the pesticides, as you can see in the units here, you enter them as kilos of active ingredient, not as kilos of product. Okay, then you've got space for all of your fuel consumption. So you've got diesel, gasoline, LPG, natural gas, and here you'll put in your volumes. Okay, and there's space here in this column for you to put information. So any information, as well as in the notes column, any information that will support your calculation. Then we have electricity, and if you click in that, you'll see there's a drop-down box for all your different types of electricity. So you select the one you're interested in. You can see your emission factor that comes up here, if you're interested to know what that is, and you put your electricity consumption in this box. And then finally, in order to calculate effluent and soil emissions, you add your data here on your annual rainfall, your irrigation applied to your crop, and again there are some guidance notes here which might help you. So your meters cubed of water that's consumed for irrigation per hectare per year, and then your climate region, your soil type, and your soil order. Okay, right. Once we've done the feedstock sheet, once we've completed that, we can have a quick look at the land use change tab. So you've got options in land use change here. This is where you would put data if you have a negative land use change situation. So for example, the conversion of a forest land to cropland, but equally if you have a positive change, so I'm talking specifically about the ESCA credit here, so the emission saving from soil carbon accumulation, then this is where you would input your data. And I won't go through it because the more you change the tabs, the more others further down change, and it can get it can get a bit confusing if I try to put one thing in and then we want to look at something else. But suffice to say, please do work your way through this. It's very, very self-explanatory, and it gives you a nice result at the end that's based on all of the emission factors and the methodology that you'll already be familiar with. Okay. So after we've gone through feedstock production, let's go to the first transport sheet. So here we take account of transport and also any blending and storage that takes place at the transport hub. So we can, first of all, we need to say what type of transport is this. In this case, we're talking about the first stage, feedstock to processing. And it's important, you'll see when we go to the results sheet, that it's important that you select something here, because that again feeds back into the results sheet, and that's how you're going to select all of your results, your step-by-step results at the end. Then you name your transport stage. So we've called that here sugarcane transport. You can call it whatever you like. You can give it the name of a transport company, you can give it a facility name, whatever you like. You select your country of operation, so you've got a drop-down list there. You select your region. You input the moisture content of your product, and then you input your transport type. Like I said, please do scroll down some of these lists because you'll find that there are many options beyond what you can see immediately. You put in your transport distance, any losses which occurred through the transport chain, and then if you've got any energy that's used at the filling or blending or storage site, then you can put those in here. Okay, and as I mentioned, you've got your notes space, so please do add anything that you feel would be pertinent to the calculation. Okay, so once we've done our first transport, we can then click on to the first processing stage. So we start by selecting our country, our region, and as I mentioned before about transport, with naming it, likewise with the processing stages, you name them, and you can name it anything you like. Then we go through the input data that we need to make our GHG calculation. So we name the product that's being produced. Again, you can give it any name you like so that you understand, and it's very clear to the auditor what product is being looked at here. We look at the moisture content. If you're working with RSB global methodology, then you need to input the currency and the price, the value of this main product, and the lower heating value. And as I mentioned before, in terms of lower heating values, you can always click on this helpful list here where you'll find a reference of a number of lower heating values. And then we've got our little navigation bar to take us back to each of the sheets. Okay, so this first bit here is all about the main product. Okay, so that's the main product that's coming out of this system. Then we're looking at the feedstock, so what's going into this system in order to produce our main product. And of course, you've got all of your units of measurement, so do take note. As I said, here we're talking about dry mass, so it's important that we take note of those, of all of those units of measurement. Then we've got space here to enter data about co-products. So any co-products that are produced. At the moment, we've got space for 2 co-products. Now, when you develop an Excel tool, there's always a balance between giving loads and loads and loads of space for people to enter as much data as they like, and also maintaining a degree of simplicity so that the tool isn't overwhelming to the user. So for now, we've chosen to have space for 2 co-products. If we find that users are saying actually there are more than 2 co-products we need, in our system, and we need space to add more data, then that's really helpful feedback for us, and we can consider how the tool needs to be expanded and developed further to be able to accommodate those sorts of systems. Okay, and then we've got space further down for your electricity inputs. So here you've got your different types of electricity. Again, you can see the emission factors that are brought up automatically. So as you change your type of electricity, you'll see that the emission factor on the right there changes as well. So let's go back to grid electricity and the amount that's used. So take note of the units of measurement again. That's kilowatt hours per kilo of main product. And you've got space to enter your heat data. Then here is your cogeneration and excess electricity. And then further down, the final part to fill in is where, if you've got any other inputs, a bit like ingredients, into your system, whether they be chemicals, materials, you've got a long list of materials, and this list is going to be expanded over time as well as we update our emission factors and expand our data. So once we've expanded that list, you'll get a revised tool, and as I mentioned before, in your emission factors columns here, as you select a material, you see the emission factor that comes out. So if we just select a material here, the emission factor has automatically come up on the right there, and then you're able to see, exactly what you're looking at here. Okay. You've also got space to put in your water consumption, so you can choose your type of water and you can put in your consumption in the cell below. Okay. So that was our first processing stage. Let's go back home. Our next transport stage, I'm not going to go through all of the data again because this is exactly the same as the first transport sheet we went through, but suffice to say, this time I'm not looking at feedstock to processing. This time I'm looking at transport between processing stages, or it might be that I'm looking at transport to the final user. So I might say, okay, I've finished my processing, and now this product is going to the end user. So here we've got the shipping of ethanol to, shipping from the ethanol plant, so shipping of the ethanol to the depot. So we're looking at ship emissions, we've got the distance, we've got 0 losses. I then want to have a second transport stage within here, because after the shipping, we've got some road transport. So I'm going to call this transport to the final user. I've named that distribution, so I know exactly what's going on there. And I've put in my road transport and my road transport distance. And I also had some electricity that was used at the transport hub, so I've popped that in here. Okay. Then finally, so we've worked our way through all of the data input sheets, and now we're going to go to the results sheets. So here on the left-hand side is where you select all of your supply chain steps. Okay, the light green cells are where you see the current step emissions. So those are the emissions for that particular stage in the supply chain, and they're always per kilogram of output from that stage. And here in the dark green cells, you see your cumulative supply chain result. Now, to see our full supply chain results, we need to select which steps we want to add to the results. So your feedstock production always comes up automatically. However, if you were, for example, working with upstream emissions that had already been calculated and you wanted to add them to your system, you have the option here. It says, do you want to enter the cumulative emissions from previous steps manually? And you can say no if you want to use the emissions from the data that you've entered, or alternatively you can say yes if you want to put your own emissions in from the upstream processes. And then these cells have turned white on the right, your cumulative supply chain result, and there you can pop in your emissions. And if you're only looking at EU red, you can pop that in there. If you're only looking at RSB global, you can pop that in there, or so forth. Okay, in this case, we want to use the data that we've inputted already. So we're going to ask it to use these results. And then we're going to select all of our supply chain steps which we're interested in. So after the feedstock, we've got some transport. So we select transport, blending and storage. And then in this cell, in this column here, you choose which of them you'd like. So here, if you remember, I said name each of your steps with a name that you can recognize so you know which step you're talking about. Sugarcane transport is the first step. After the sugarcane's been transported to the processing facility, we want to look at a feedstock processing calculation. And the particular data sheet was sugarcane to ethanol plant. And you can see that as I click on these, the results are automatically fed into the sheet. So after the feedstock processing, so after our cane was processed into ethanol, we want to add the next transport stage, which was the shipping. And finally, we add the last transport stage, which was distribution, road distribution. And you can see that the feedstock factors and allocation factors automatically feed in, and these, of course, will affect how your emissions are allocated at each step. So as I said, your current step emissions are always per kilogram dry matter at that particular stage in the supply chain. So in our dark green cells here, this is what we're interested in. We want to know what our final supply chain result is. So we also have to enter the lowering heating value of our final product. So in this case, as I said, you've got your list of lower heating values here. If your product isn't there, of course, you would need to search out that value yourself in the literature. So if we put in a lower heating value of 44, then up pop our results. And you can see we've got 3 different results depending on the methodology that's been used. And we've got our actual greenhouse gas emission results, but we also have our greenhouse gas emission reduction results in the cells below. And if you want to see the result per kilogram of finished product, so in this case per kilogram of ethanol, you've got the results here at the end of your cumulative, as it says here, cumulative supply chain result. So there's your actual value per kilogram of material, your actual value per megajoule of material, and your emission reduction. Okay, and you can see your fossil fuel comparator values here, which are automatically entered. Okay, and I think that is it in terms of going through the tool.